Morning, everybody. I am awake. It is crazy because I was awake actually at 3 o'clock this morning, went to bed at 10, awake at 3, figured out I left the light on downstairs, so I went downstairs to turn it off. And then I was listening to my YouTube, which was all about the different writers back in the early 1920s, around the First World War. And actually, it was interesting. I learned about Matisse, Picasso, and this is all in France. And then all the different American writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Hemingway, James Joyce, Gertrude Stein, all of them. And they all kind of hung out together, and they were as a result of the war. I mean, the American ones, they went to the war and was very disenchanted with the war, came back to their homeland here, like in Illinois or Indiana or or other places, and couldn't really get with the program. I guess disillusionment, I guess they were talking about. And then they went back, they found it was easier or cheaper to live in France. So you can live like $100 a month. You can live nicely in France back in the 1920s. And so they all went to France and hung out and really, had a lot of social stuff going on, drinking, and because there's prohibition is happening here too. Drinking and just, a creative outlet because of what they experienced. And and then they just did what they did, figured out how to write, and because these were Ivy Leaguers too, so they were already educated, and they needed a place to go and write and exchange ideas with different people. And they met different artists like Matisse and Picasso, and I think was it Gertrude Stein. She was bringing in different artists from all over the country. So it was interesting listening to that. So I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, another creative outlet from a really negative experience like World War I. And so that was kind of cool to learn about that. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I guess with my YouTube going through, with me looking at the different music and learning about the biographies, it went right into like Hemingway and Steinbeck and all of that. I'm like, okay, okay, I like where this is going, YouTube. This is cool, So anyways, I wanted to go through my news feed and talk about just certain things. Well, talk about like the vaccine stuff and antibodies, because this really, this is why I get so mad at the anti-vax world. And the reason why is because they're painting like all the vaccines as deadly and it's going to kill you, but it doesn't kill everybody right off the bat. Yes, over time. And this is where we have to be really, really careful with our speech, because when you say that vaccines are going to kill you, people think it's going to happen right off the bat. As soon as you get a vaccine, you're going to die. And we have to start speaking in a different way about it. And that's what I notice that needs to be improved with the anti-vax campaign. Okay, so I'm not against the anti-vax world. I'm not against. I am really like, I can see that they can improve their platform, so they're not discrediting themselves because their friends received vaccines and their friends' children received vaccines and they didn't die. But yet they're saying that vaccines are deadly. You're going to die. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. So this is why I need all of you guys that are on the Jilly Juice to understand how to speak about why vaccines can be deadly relative to what you bring to the table. Okay? So it's like you have to know really what kind of mutations you have. I mean, when I was learning about the holistic industry and about my dog, and I didn't want her to get vaccines, any more vaccines, like I got her from the shelter, and I thought the shelter would require her to get the rest of her vaccines because she had her first rounds of rabies shots, and I didn't want her to get her second round. And I think the second round is optional or something, I don't know. But the dog warden, the game warden, or the dog warden here doesn't require you to get they don't require any proof of vaccines. They just want the dog registered and to pay your registration. So, okay, fine. But I was going through looking for a holistic vet, and I found one like down in Columbus, which is south of me. Or is it north of me? I think I found one north of me. And they're like, well, we can do titer tests. I'm like, what's a titer test? And I didn't know anything about like all this thing with antibodies and nothing about antibodies and mutations and all that. I was just, looking to figure out how to find a holistic vet. They're like, yeah, titer test, it tests to see if they have the antibodies for the rabies. So I'm like, okay, well, there you go. I mean, and I didn't even know that antibodies were bad back then. I was like, okay, well, then that's what I'll do. And when I never did do it, because I found out that wasn't required by my government here for her to prove her vaccinations. I guess until something happens, and then you got to prove, and then your dog goes into quarantine if she does anything stupid. So anyways, so then it just dawned on me when I was thinking about like all the different things I've been talking about with the vaccines and the antibodies and too many antibodies and the RH, the RH factor as well as the A, B, and O blood types. And then we figured out that if you mix A, B, and O together, the O negative person is going to die from an A positive or AB positive blood type because all that surface marker antigen is going to thicken up the blood because of what does antigen do? It creates antibodies. What are antibodies? They are natural killer cells. Okay, what do natural killer cells do? They go after whatever offending toxin. Okay, and they say usually it goes after, so whatever vaccine you get, like the measles, mumps, and rubella, there's an antibody for the measles, mumps, and rubella. But while it's attacking those specific viruses and bacteria, it's also attacking the body. It's taxing the body too. Because even though you have a little bit of antibodies, imagine if you had the amount over time accumulating, right? And then when you look at the RH and the ABO blood types and why you can't mix certain bloods together, you're like, oh, that's the extreme end of what would happen if you had too many antibodies, right? And then you have all these different diseases, like which I mentioned. What is the disease? It is the Waldenstrom's disease, and then lymphoma. Okay, so that's like huge because how many other diseases of the blood are linked to too many antibodies because of too many vaccines? And even if you didn't get a vaccine, your exposure to someone who did, because people don't just materialize disease. It doesn't just like happen all of a sudden the body just says, okay, I'm going to have a disease. And the diseases that are out there that we're getting vaccines for are not just laying in the dirt, or those guys over in the middle of the Atlantic or the middle of the Pacific Ocean that are on an island would be getting all of the crazy diseases that we would be getting. But no, they can't even come here because we're too pathogenic. They got to stay over there in their island because they don't have enough antibodies to fight off the diseases that we have. Okay, so it tells you that disease doesn't just materialize in the human body, for one. Disease doesn't just lay in the dirt waiting to jump on some unsuspecting person. It has to be introduced. It has to be introduced to a population. So regardless if you received a vaccine or not, somebody did. Patient zero, we have no idea who that patient zero was that received that first vaccine that then created the infection, the plague of sorts, right? We don't know who that was, but it's been introduced. But as soon as as soon as somebody receives that, or what is it? They get exposed to it. They build antibodies. As long as they don't die, then they have the antibodies. And then maybe throughout their life, they are able to keep those antibodies at bay, repair the damage that those antibodies did to them, as well as repair the damage from the initial exposure. And they're great. And anyone around them wouldn't be exposed to that disease because the disease is gone. It's been dealt with. So if they were around someone that never did get the, whatever, let's say the measles, and this person already has the antibodies, they weren't shedding, they weren't contagious, and they already healed from the exposure, and a person who's never ever been exposed to the measles wouldn't catch it. They wouldn't catch it. So then the disease would have stopped right there. You wouldn't need to keep reintroducing the MMR to the population because it would have already been dealt with the person. The person either would have died because they had a really low immune system, or the person would have just healed, and that's where the disease would have stopped right there. But the fact that we keep reinfecting the population is what causes this disease to keep going. And then here's the thing, then you have then you have all these different diseases that they've created, or what manifested from all these different vaccines that have been introduced to the population. They mix in with other people who have different biochemistries and different mutations from other exposures to different vaccines. Now you have a new disease, and so then you get vaccinated with more pathogens. And then they say, oh yeah, it's not a strong pathogen, it's just enough to create antibodies. Well, regardless, antibodies have already been proven. Having too many antibodies in your system has been proven to be deadly over a period of time. Okay, so this is where you anti-vaxxers really need to learn how to change the way in which you speak. You have to understand the mutations you already have, because that will tell you how many antibodies you already have in your system. It's like getting a titer test for a dog. Why don't you titer test yourself? Titer test your child. And this comes with education, not fear, not reactivity, not activism. This comes with education to understand what vaccines actually do. Not say, oh yeah, it's going to kill you, and then someone gets it, doesn't kill you. No, it's understanding that too many antibodies over a period of time does cause mutations, cancer, disease, and chronic illness. No different than when you're exposed to too many pathogens with no balancing force, that the body's going to get overwhelmed and die. See, all of that is the same equation. Too many antibodies, too many natural killer cells, too many pathogens, too many negative elements, too much overabundance of heavy metals, too much, whatever it is that is violating the laws of the immune system, that all equals death faster or slower relative to what you bring to the table. And so this is why it is some people have died from vaccines and why others don't. And this is a loophole that biotech has. Now, where you can hold them responsible is by saying, hey, let's do a titer test. Actually, don't even tell them. Go find a neutral party that will test your immunoglobulin or test your blood to see how many antibodies you already have. And you know that you pass along your mutations to your child. This is where you guys have to understand how the human body works. This is where the anti-vax community fails to be effective in their platforms, because they have no idea how the human body works and how mutations get passed down from one generation to another, which means it tells me that antibodies probably also get passed down from one generation to another. So if you already had all your vaccines back in the 1970s, 1980s, then most likely you have the antibodies been created from that, right? Then most likely your child will have the antibodies already built in. But I don't know that for sure. So wouldn't it be incumbent upon you to go and find out? And then, then here's the thing, another way to know besides that, okay, you can do it that way if you're so inclined. Then there's the 23andMe. So maybe we can use 23andMe to our advantage, not be afraid that they're going to use our DNA, because they already are using our DNA. As soon as you entered into the hospital, into the grid, and they're taking blood from you and doing all these tests for pregnancy and something else, you already have your DNA exposed. So doing 23andMe is not going to be that far of a stretch, okay? And it's going to help you, give you more data to use against a system that is trying to force vaccinate people without properly vetting to see if this is an appropriate reason to do it. They right now are just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Doesn't matter if you succumb or not. Doesn't matter if your kid has more mutations and gets more symptoms from that vaccine. No, now you can say, okay, I have now, here's my 23andMe, and they only test for 10. So I don't know, I mean, it would be far more effective to go get an actual immunoglobulin test to test for all the antibodies that you have. But hey, see if you do the test for the immunoglobulin and then do the test from 23andMe and see if they match. And it means that if you already have all these different antibodies in your body, then it would stand to reason not to then get your kid vaccinated for all these different things, especially if it's like, you know, the MMR, because measles, mumps, and rubella is prevalent. Everybody has been exposed to that in some way. Everybody has an antibody in some way from that exposure. It's not from a vaccine, it's from just exposure to somebody else. So there's no reason to get a vaccine. And then that's where you can show the doctor, because, you know, at this point, they're giving us a loophole. Either there's no more religious exemptions in some states. Now you have to have actual doctor's approval. But here's the thing. If your baby or you or a loved one who is incapacitated in some way was given a vaccine without your permission, and then that, you know, and then that person succumbed to some issue, you know, so I mean, it's hard to say, let's say, you know, they're in the hospital, I'm just giving a scenario, and all of a sudden their health took a turn for the worse. And maybe you saw on the daily sheet that they were given a vaccine. Well, that's okay. Then you're like, okay, well, does correlation equal causation? Well, correlation doesn't mean causation if you don't have the proof. But if you already did a titer test on one of your, you know, on your loved one who's in the hospital or your baby, and it shows that you had this titer test from, like, let's say 2 years ago, and then let's say that the baby or the person took a turn for the worse, you can get other titer tests to see maybe what the newest antibody that was most prevalent. Because I'm thinking, when you're looking at the CDC and how they determine, you know, when the antibodies get built up, they say that it takes a while for the antibodies to get built up, and then there's a lot of it in the beginning. That's why the inflammation happens, because you have all these antibodies that are coming up and killing things and killing you, right? So yeah, when you have a specific symptom, then you know it has to be from that recent vaccine. And so if you're in that context of where, you know, you have people that are under a doctor's care and you're in the hospital, let's say you're a mother having a baby in the hospital and you have some kind of like weird inflammation going, or your baby does, and you said no vaccines, now your baby is having all these weird symptoms, then yes, correlation does equal causation. Go get a titer test, see exactly how many antibodies are prevalent, and you'll know that they gave that baby a vaccine without your knowledge, because the antibodies are there. They're marked. Antibodies are marked. Okay, so no different than if you had somebody that, you know, that shouldn't have received a vaccine at all. They're already sick, like that guy Juan, what's his name, said that he died from a vaccine, a flu shot. Should he have received that vaccine to begin with? It's like you almost have to be actually prove that you need the vaccine versus not. I mean, if you have already too many antibodies and you're also already suffering from all these different diseases, your immune system is low and you have issues, you're taking medications and all this, a vaccine could kill you. So wouldn't it be incumbent upon the medical community to make sure that you're able to handle the extra antibodies? Not to say, hey, free vaccines, free flu shots, come take it. We're not going to do any kind of vetting to see if it's appropriate for you. Oh no, here, just take it. So this is where you guys need to be very, very diligent in your understanding of how the human body works, how to use the system's way of gathering data to your advantage. Because the more data you have regarding antibodies in your body and how you can test for it on your own, without alerting them what you're doing, because I mean, they'd be wondering, why do you want to know how many antibodies you have? Why, you know? But hey, the 23andMe, at least it gives you 10, you know, things that they test for. So you'll know how many antibodies you have, even out of those 10. If you have all 10, then most likely you probably have all 20 or 30 or whatever is out there. And then you can ask your doctor, hey, can you maybe ask not even your doctor, ask a neutral party like a lab. You want to test for all the antibodies in your body, and there are, and I did think I put a link to an example of a lab that will test your blood for all the antibodies. And so you get that data, and that is going to be your evidence to then give to the doctor, whoever it is, if you're pregnant or if you're trying to get your kid in school and you need a waiver, a medical waiver, here it is. Okay. And then you show them all the different diseases when you have too many antibodies in your body. And then you tell them, hey, the reason why we don't mix A, B, and O blood together because the O negatives are going to die from too much antigen. I'm not trying to complicate my child's life by too many vaccines that create too many antibodies. So it's not even about the pathogens that are in the vaccines, it's the antibodies that are being created. And that's exactly what the vaccine community is doing. And that's their loophole, why they're saying, oh yeah, these vaccines aren't harmful because it's not a strong pathogen. It's the antibodies that is what is killing us. And that is the perspective we must come from. Not this, oh my God, vaccine's going to kill you. That is the ineffective way to get up your point across to someone that has no idea what's going on. It's all about education. It's all about learning how to come from a very logical perspective, not a reactive, oh my God, henny penny. And then you show the evidence. No different than when you're in a courtroom trying to convict somebody. You just can't say hearsay. You can't use hearsay to try to get somebody in trouble or get them accountable, hold them accountable. No, you have to have a paper trail. You got to have tests. You got to have things to prove your argument. Okay? Then that's how you can sue your doctors for giving you vaccines when you shouldn't have received them. Or you can sue the doctors for giving vaccines to your loved ones when they were stuck in the hospital when they shouldn't have received it. You need to take control of your health and your education about your body. If not, you're going to be left to whatever they say is what is right. And then obviously it's not, because look at the outcome. People are dying. They're getting cancer, disease, and chronic illness. And they're like, oh, you know, and so this is why I say causation does not mean correlation until you have proof. Well, here's a freaking proof. Let's do the titer tests. Let's test how many antibodies. Then let's take the knowledge about why too many antibodies actually is detrimental to the human body. Let's take the evidence from not mixing A, B, and O blood together. Let's look at the different diseases attached to and connected to too many antibodies in the blood. Waldenstrom's disease, lymphoma, blood diseases. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I'll tell you what, if there's a lawyer on here that's watching me, this would be an excellent way to make a shiz ton of money. You know, if you have a paper trail and a case and, you know, a very, you know, open and shut case when someone received a vaccine and they got maimed or they died. Okay, if they already, you know, because you can test to see what the newest antibodies are in the system, because they're probably more prevalent than the other ones. Now with Jilly Juice, where does Jilly Juice come in when it comes to too many antibodies? Well, it's about the body does repair the damage because of the strategic nutrition, and it keeps those antibodies at bay to where they're not overproducing. It doesn't eradicate it altogether, because no, you've already been exposed to that disease. You already have the antibodies in your system, but they're not accumulating, and you're not going to receive any more vaccines. But either way, if you did, your body will be able to purge out the pathogens, whatever that was, rebuild the cell structures that were broken and damaged from that. And then you're constantly rebuilding any damage from those NK cells. So that's why I was able to reverse my illness, is because I had probably a bunch of pathogens that were causing mutations in my reproductive system, causing hormonal fluctuations. And then, you know, and then who knows? And I was progressively getting worse, because I'm sure those antibodies and the pathogens, the more pathogens I had and the less nutrition that I was taking in and absorbing created more antibodies, because I had more pathogens I was exposed to that my body couldn't fight off. And so then antibodies get created. So this is what I'm saying is that, okay, if I can reverse my illness, and you can see the difference in how I speak, you see the difference in my everything, the way I look, my persona, then it shows that, yes, I received a lot of vaccines from the military too, twice. I was stuck twice, no, 3 times. Once in basic training, no, once at MEPS, and then basic training, and then MEPS again. Yeah, because I re-enlisted. So 3 times that I was stuck with all these different needles. Okay. So if I can reverse all of those issues if I can reverse the outcomes from exposure to too many vaccines and the exposure to all the different pathogens and exposure to all the different antibiotics, from cannabis, because when you take cannabis or any of those other types of anti-inflammatories, guess what they do? They create antibodies, because you're lowering the immune system, which means that you're going to be taking in more negative elements, which means more antibodies get created, and that's what kills you. Okay, so negative elements, a bunch of negative elements, like the detoxes, pills, powders, and supplements, prescription drugs, the immunotherapies, the immune suppression types of protocols, they all contribute to antibody creation. And they anesthetize you as well. So that way you can walk someplace and be exposed to all these chemicals and you won't even care. And so now your body has to go and fight off those chemicals that you're exposing yourself to because you're not in your right mind to get out of that situation. And then, and then guess what? You have now more antibodies. And then that's why the aging process happens, because of all those natural killer cells are aging you. Okay? So that's why this is all connected. This is why smoking pot and dealing with cannabis is not the answer, because it contributes to the problem. It doesn't help the problem that we have. It contributes to it. This is why we have to understand how to speak about vaccines. It's not only the pathogens, which is a very small amount. They say it's an inactivated virus, right? That's how they're able to say, oh, you guys are all reacting. No, it's the antibodies. And then you go to the CDC website, talk about how vaccines work, and they're all about the antibodies. Sorry, but natural killer cells kill people. Hello? So this is how you have recourse. So anyone that's a lawyer here, figure out how to position this information to go after the industry that just has this out there willy-nilly for anybody to just go get a vaccine without properly vetting the patient. If somebody gives you a vaccine without properly going through and making sure that you don't have too many antibodies put you over the edge, or if you give somebody a vaccine and they have a major reaction, then you can go and get another titer test and see what antibodies, and those antibodies are the one that cause that reaction, because that's called inflammation. Inflammation is the body trying to heal, but it's also the antibodies being produced to fight off that pathogen. But guess what? Even though that pathogen is gone, those antibodies are there, and those still do destroy the body. It does thicken the blood. And then too many times you get, you are exposed to pathogens that you're not reversing the damage because of your drug habits, whatever they are, then that's when the aging process or cancer, disease, and chronic illness step in. So if you're an anti-vaxxer, you need to be more effective in your arguments so you're not discrediting yourself. Okay? Don't say that it's look at the inserts. That's an argument that's like, obviously it's going over the head of everybody, right? Who cares what the inserts say? Look at the CDC website. Understand how vaccines work and why they work. Because your friends are going to be taking these vaccines and their kid doesn't have any reaction. Or if they have a reaction, it's fine for them. And the kids, okay, they don't have any of those issues. Or the CDC or the inserts say that you may experience this temporarily. And in worst case scenarios, you may have, Guillain-Barré or something else, right? But those are very few and far between. And even if you did get Guillain-Barré, how would you be able to connect it to the vaccine? So this is where you guys have to be more effective in how in which you do your argument, okay? If your kid does get a reaction, first of all, you should have already a titer test on your child and yourself to see how many antibodies you have, and then that's your argument even to not even get the vaccine. But let's say you decide to get the vaccine, and you want to do an experiment on your child for whatever reason. You get a titer test on yourself as well as your child. You know how many antibodies, and you go find a neutral place, not your doctor. You go find a neutral laboratory, get a list of everything. You can do 23andMe to see how accurate they are, juxtaposition them together, and then go get the vaccine and then see what happens. And then do another titer test, okay, to test to see which antibodies are more present than others. And also do the 23andMe. Well, no. Yeah, do 23andMe because they'll test for it. And then they will tell you. And that's how you'll know that that vaccine is a direct correlation to your kid being maimed or died. Okay? Seriously, guys, use the system to take the system down. The more data you have, the more armed you're going to be with your arguments. Just pressing on articles about how dangerous they are is obviously ineffective. We need cases. We need actual cases that say this, too many antibodies, this is what caused my kid to have autism. This. But you got to get that data. You must get that data, seriously. The data is what's going to back up and substantiate your arguments, and titer tests are the data, because that's what the CDC and the vaccine industry is focusing on, not on the pathogens, but on the actual antibodies. And those antibodies are directly connected to the vaccines that your kid received and you received at some point. So your intuition is correct. Correlation does mean causation, but they say it doesn't. But you got to prove it. You just can't make a hearsay argument. Oh yeah, vaccines kill you. Vaccines, will hurt you in this. Where's your proof? Oh, my kid got a reaction. Okay. Well, that they said that was part of the thing. Now you have to go further than then the kid is gonna get a reaction, because that's already been established. They already told you, yeah, you're gonna get a little bit of reaction. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. It's great, whatever, right? And the people are like, okay, that's fine. That's why people are not alarmed, because their kid didn't die. They just got a reaction. But now you bring up the whole natural killer cells and the antibodies and the A, B, and O, and then the different diseases from too much antibodies. Now you have a freaking argument. Now you have an argument. Right now, the way you guys are doing your anti-vax protesting gives you zero credibility, except the fact that you're just causing fear. You're not backing up your arguments with substantial information. Connecting the dots. This is where, when you're an activist, if you're going to be an activist, you do it correctly. You do it with logic, not with emotion. Because when you do it with emotion, you lose sight of your goal, which is to actually win. Not have it go on deaf ears. But we need a good lawyer, and we need to have an example. So how many of you want to be a pioneer in this? All right. Wow. Huh. So yeah, so go to 23andMe and go get your blood test, see how many diseases and antibodies you have, and then go to a different lab, not the one that's attached to your doctor, and test your blood to see how many antibodies and all the different antibodies you have and what they mean. That you're protected against this, protected against that, and then that way that your baby is obviously, that gets passed down. So your baby wouldn't need to have the MMR shot or something else, okay? Because it already has the antibodies against it. So why would they need an MMR shot if you've already had it? But you should get your baby tested anyways. If and I don't know how you do that, but maybe you can, there's a way to have somebody, to have them test your baby's blood. But that'll be left to those of you who are very creative. Maybe somebody in a lab. that I could test your baby's blood. And then let me know. Okay? So this is about human survival. Humans that want to survive will be very creative in how they get the data. You've got to be creative. You must. Gone are the days of emotional outbursts and activism. Now we have to be logical. We have to use the system to be able to get our argument across. Because the system, the infrastructure is there for you to do that. You just haven't figured out how to do it. I'm giving you guys a clue on how you could do it. I don't have any kids, so I couldn't do it. Yes, I could go get a titer test if I wanted to, but I have no reason to. But I could if I wanted to, but that would mean that I have to get somebody to take my blood and I have to go through a shot, and I don't like needles. So whoever is okay with taking needles and getting their blood tested to figure out how many antibodies they have and list out everything that they have that they're protected against, you know, feel free. You're welcome, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so this is just more info for you to use when the time comes, so you have recourse to make your argument stronger against the vaccine community. Okay? It's not about the actual pathogens, it's about the antibodies. It's about the antibodies. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. I love you. Thank you. Bye.